Can you hold my bag for just 2 minutes? Grant Ellis barely had time to look up before a heavy canvas bag landed in his arms. The stranger standing in front of him had rain-soaked hair, one shoe slipping off her heel, and a streak of blue paint across the sleeve of her jacket. She was breathing like she had just sprinted across half of Richmond. Grant looked down at the faded mint-green bag, then back at her. Do I look like a luggage service? But she was already gone. She had spotted an elderly woman stumbling beside the ticket machines. Before the woman could hit the floor, the girl rushed forward and caught her beneath the arms. "Someone call for help," she shouted. Passengers gathered around. A station employee pushed through the crowd, while another called emergency services. Grant remained where he was, still holding the bag. 10 minutes passed. Then 30. He considered leaving it with station security, but the bag contained a phone that kept vibrating, a sketchbook sticking out of the top, and what appeared to be a child's sock tied around one strap. Nothing about it suggested a person who had planned ahead. When the paramedics finally arrived, Grant moved closer. Through the crowd, he saw the girl speaking quickly to them, pointing toward the elderly woman and answering questions. Then, before Grant could reach her, she climbed into the ambulance. The doors closed. She never looked back. Grant stood beneath the station lights with her entire bag still hanging from his hand. He had no idea whether she was related to the woman, whether she had gone along simply to help, or whether this had been an elaborate way of abandoning 20 pounds of personal chaos. The phone inside the bag rang again. The screen displayed, "Milo, do not ignore again." Grant stared at it, then answered. "Naomi?" a boy's voice said immediately. "Where are you?" "This isn't Naomi." There was a pause. "Why do you have my sister's phone?" Grant looked at the ambulance, disappearing beyond the rain-streaked windows. "That is a surprisingly complicated question." The boy's suspicion sharpened. "Did she lose it?" "She handed me the entire bag, and then left in an ambulance." Another pause. "That actually sounds like Naomi." The boy introduced himself as Milo. He was 12, and becoming worried because Naomi was supposed to be meeting someone from family services. "They're coming to review the guardianship stuff," Milo explained. "She said she'd be home early, which already made me suspicious." Grant checked the time. "How late is she?" "Almost an hour." Milo's voice became quieter. "If she misses this, they might write down that she isn't cooperating." Grant looked at the paint-stained bag again. It was no longer just something a careless stranger had left behind. It belonged to a young woman trying to hold a family together. With Milo's help, Grant found the nearest hospital and drove there. He located Naomi in the emergency department hallway, arguing with a receptionist. "I'm not asking for her medical history," she said. "I just want to know Mrs. Bellamy isn't alone." "She's with the doctors," the receptionist replied. "And her daughter?" "On her way." Naomi finally turned. Grant set the bag on the chair beside her. "Your 2 minutes lasted 3 hours." Relief crossed her face so quickly it almost made him forget how irritated he was. "You came back. Technically, you're the one who disappeared." Naomi explained that Mrs. Bellamy attended pottery classes at Lantern House, the community arts center where Naomi worked. She recognized her, but did not know how to contact her family, so she had gone with the paramedics until someone could be reached. Then Naomi grabbed the canvas bag and opened it. "Did you look inside?" "No, not even when you smelled the emergency cookie." Grant frowned. "There's an emergency cookie." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "Now I'm not sure whether to trust you." "You handed your entire life to a stranger in a train station," Grant said. "Trust may already be one of your weaker skills." Her mouth twitched despite herself. Before she could answer, the phone rang again. "Milo." Naomi listened for less than 10 seconds before the color left her face. "They're already at the house," she whispered. "They'll only wait 20 more minutes." She hurried toward the exit, then stopped when she saw the notice announcing that bus service had been suspended because of the storm. Grant watched her calculate the impossible distance. "How far is your house?" 20 minutes. "By car?" She looked at him. 45 if you drive responsibly." Grant picked up the bag again. "I'm already regretting this." Naomi hurried after him. "Does that mean you'll drive me?" Grant pushed open the hospital doors as rain swept across the pavement. "It means your 2 minutes still aren't over." Naomi talked almost the entire drive home. Grant quickly realized it was not because she was comfortable. It was because silence gave her too much room to worry. "The sock belongs to Milo," she explained, gesturing toward the canvas bag on her lap. "Probably, unless it belongs to one of the kids at Lantern House. Or Mrs. Bellamy. Although, if it belongs to Mrs. Bellamy, I have several questions. Grant kept his eyes on the rain-soaked road. How does someone accidentally carry another person's sock? You say that like socks have never migrated. They haven't. Your life sounds very controlled. It was. Naomi glanced at him, but he did not explain. Instead, she continued. She told him she had been banned from using the toaster at Lantern House after trying to warm a cheese sandwich wrapped in foil. There were sparks, she admitted. That is generally what foil does in a toaster. I know that now. She also explained Milo's contact name. I missed 3 of his calls once. Why? I was working. All 3 times? The first 2. The third time I was looking for my phone. Grant glanced at the device in her hand. Where was it? In my pocket. He nodded once. The name seems justified. Naomi looked around the spotless interior of his car. There was not a receipt, coffee cup, or loose coin anywhere. Has anyone ever eaten in this car? Not successfully. That sounds like a threat. Grant pointed toward the bag. Why do you carry an emergency cookie but not your wallet? Different emergencies. By the time they reached Naomi's street, the rain had softened, but the house ahead looked as though it had been losing arguments with bad weather for years. A woman in a gray coat stood beneath the porch roof, checking her watch. Naomi was out of the car before Grant had fully stopped. I'm here, she called. I'm so sorry. There was a medical emergency. The woman introduced herself as Ms. Parker from Family Services. Grant remained near the doorway, intending to leave once Naomi was safely inside. Then he noticed the loose porch board, the leaking ceiling, the railing that shifted when Naomi touched it. Inside, unopened mail covered half the kitchen table. The refrigerator contained mustard, 1 bruised apple, and a carton of milk close to expiration. Above them, the kitchen light flickered like it was trying to send a warning. A thin boy with dark curls appeared in the hallway. He looked at Naomi, then at Grant. Are you her boyfriend? No, Grant and Naomi said together. Milo narrowed his eyes. That was suspiciously synchronized. Milo, Naomi warned. What? I'm gathering information. Ms. Parker began the review. She explained calmly that Naomi had 6 weeks to demonstrate the house was safe, that she had reliable income, that Milo's needs were being met, and that she had a realistic plan for finishing school while remaining his guardian. If those conditions were not met, Milo would temporarily move to Ohio with their aunt. Naomi nodded quickly. I can do that. Grant saw her hand tremble as she signed the paperwork. Milo saw it too. Neither of them said anything. After Ms. Parker left, Naomi leaned against the table and forced a smile. Good news. I only have to fix my house, save my degree, find more money, and become a responsible adult in 6 weeks. You should probably make a list, Grant said. Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out 5 crumpled sheets of paper. I have lists. Milo examined one. This says buy toothpaste 3 times. That means it's important. Grant should have left. Instead, he watched Naomi wrap silver duct tape around the loose railing. He went back to his car, retrieved a toolbox, and returned. Naomi stared at him. Why are you still here? Because apparently your house is also bad at asking for help. He tightened the railing, secured 2 loose boards, and climbed into the attic to inspect the leak. Milo followed him with a flashlight. You know how to fix things? I'm an architect. Milo looked impressed. Naomi once fixed a cabinet with a scarf. It held for 4 days, Naomi called from below. While clearing space on the kitchen table, Grant found an open envelope beneath the pile of mail. Inside was a redevelopment map. Naomi's house sat inside a red boundary line, so did Lantern House. At the bottom of the page was the logo of Vale Urban Development, Grant's company. He recognized the project immediately. Richard Vale had mentioned assigning him a major neighborhood redevelopment the following week. Grant looked toward Naomi, who was laughing as Milo tried to explain why duct tape was not a building material. She had no idea the company Grant worked for might soon destroy the 2 places holding her life together. He folded the map and returned it to the envelope. For the first time that evening, Grant chose not to tell the truth. Grant told himself he was only coming back to finish the repairs. The first visit was because one of Naomi's windows refused to close. The second was because the front porch roof leaked whenever it rained. The third was because Milo's bicycle chain snapped on the morning of science club, and Grant happened to be driving by. Or so he claimed. The fourth visit was because Naomi needed someone to look over her illustration portfolio. The fifth was because Lantern House wanted an architect to inspect a crack running along one of the old brick walls. Somewhere between fixing broken hinges and measuring ceilings, stopping by the little house on Maple Street quietly became part of Grant's week. Naomi noticed something else. He was never late, not once. If he said 3 o'clock, his truck rolled into the driveway at exactly 3. She folded her arms as he checked his watch before walking inside Lantern House. "Do you schedule your emotions too?" Grant didn't even look up. "Only the inconvenient ones," she laughed. "I knew it." "You knew what?" "That somewhere in your phone there's probably an alarm called Feel Something. 3:30 sharp." He almost smiled. 4 o'clock. See? Worse. Lantern House slowly became familiar to Grant. Children painted messy landscapes. Mrs. Bellamy returned after recovering from her hospital visit, insisting everyone stop treating her like fragile glass. Naomi floated from room to room carrying paintbrushes, snacks, homework, forgotten backpacks, and occasionally someone else's shoes. She somehow remembered every child's favorite color, but forgot where she left her own phone at least twice a day. Grant had never met someone whose life looked so chaotic, yet somehow kept everyone else standing. One evening Naomi insisted on cooking dinner to thank him. "It's homemade," she announced proudly. Milo looked worried. Grant noticed. "Should I be concerned?" "I'd recommend staying flexible." Naomi placed a frozen lasagna into the oven. 25 minutes later, thick smoke drifted through the kitchen. The smoke detector screamed. Naomi opened the oven. The lasagna resembled a construction material. "I think I accidentally used the broiler." "You think?" Grant asked. Milo calmly opened a cupboard and placed a cereal box on the table. "This is our backup chef," Grant sighed. "I'll cook." Naomi leaned against the counter while he chopped vegetables with precise movements. "You can cook? I can follow instructions." She watched him measure ingredients without guessing. "That explains why we're fundamentally incompatible. I've begun to suspect that." Dinner turned out surprisingly good. Even Naomi admitted it. "This tastes responsible." "I'll take that as a compliment." It wasn't meant as one. It still counts. Later that evening, Naomi spread several sketchbooks across the dining table. "I suppose you've earned permission." "Permission for what?" "To see why my bag weighs as much as a small elephant." Grant carefully opened the first sketchbook. Every page felt alive. Children laughing during art class, Mrs. Bellamy shaping clay with flower-covered hands, Milo asleep over a science textbook, their weathered little house glowing under strings of porch lights. Then, Grant stopped turning pages. There he was, sitting alone inside Bluebird Coffee. Another sketch. Same cafe. Different day. Again and again. He slowly looked up. "You've been drawing me." Naomi suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Not in a creepy way. "There are at least 7 drawings. I can explain. I'm listening." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind one ear. "I used to study people there." "You were studying me?" "You always ordered 2 coffees." Grant remained silent. "You'd put one across the table," Naomi continued softly. "And nobody ever came. I kept wondering who you were waiting for." Grant stared at the sketches for several long seconds. Finally, he closed the book. "I wasn't waiting." "No, I was remembering." The room grew quiet. Her name was Vanessa. Naomi didn't interrupt. "We were engaged." He looked toward the kitchen window instead of at her. "We had a wedding date. A house. Furniture picked out. I even designed the place we'd planned to live." His voice remained calm. Almost too calm. "Then she accepted a job in London." Naomi waited. "She didn't tell me. Not immediately. She made plans. Packed. Signed contracts. Applied for a visa. While we were choosing wedding invitations." Grant let out a quiet breath. "She didn't leave on the day she told me. She left months earlier. I was just the last person to know." Naomi understood. Grant wasn't afraid of being abandoned. He was afraid of believing in a future that had already disappeared. Softly, she smiled. "For what it's worth, I really did plan to come back after 2 minutes." Grant looked at her. "Your planning remains deeply concerning." She laughed. "So I've been told." A few evenings later, volunteers stayed late cleaning Lantern House after an art workshop. By the time everyone left, only Grant and Naomi remained. Paint jars lined the tables. The old building was unusually quiet. Naomi was wiping blue paint from a window when Grant noticed a streak of green across her cheek. Without thinking, he stepped closer. "You missed a spot," she frowned. "Where?" He reached up. His thumb gently brushed the paint away. Naomi froze. For perhaps the first time since they'd met. She had nothing to say. Their eyes met. The distance between them slowly disappeared. Grant leaned in. Naomi did too. The world felt impossibly still. The lights suddenly flashed on. "I need help with fractions." Milo stood in the doorway holding a math workbook. He looked from Grant to Naomi, back to Grant. But apparently timing is also difficult. Naomi covered her face with both hands. Grant stepped back, clearing his throat. Nobody mentioned the almost kiss. Nobody had to. Everything between them had changed. The following morning, Grant was summoned to Richard Vale's office. Richard slid a thick project file across the polished conference table. "I've decided to put you in charge." Grant opened the folder. Jackson Ward redevelopment. His stomach tightened. Detailed maps covered the pages. Apartment towers, retail space, parking structures, demolition zones. One red outline surrounded two addresses he knew by heart. Lantern House Arts Center, Naomi's home. Richard smiled. "If you deliver this project on schedule, you'll become the youngest partner this company has ever promoted." Grant remained silent. Richard's smile faded into something more serious. "The announcement is next month. Until then," he tapped the folder, "this project stays confidential." Grant closed the file. For the first time in years, the career he had spent a decade building and the people he had only just begun to care about were standing on opposite sides of the same blueprint. Grant accepted the promotion, not because he wanted the title, because he believed it was the only way to save what mattered. On his first day as lead architect, he walked into Richard Vale's office, carrying 3 revised proposals. "The apartment complex can be shifted 2 blocks east," Grant explained, spreading new drawings across the table. "Lantern House can remain. We can preserve the older residential street and still meet the city's housing targets." Richard barely glanced at the plans. "No." Grant tried again. "What if we reduce the parking structure?" "No. We could restore several historic buildings instead of demolishing." Richard pushed the drawings back toward him. "We are building the future, Grant. We're not running a museum. The city approved this project because it's efficient. I hired you to execute it, not redesign it." Grant left the office with every proposal rejected. Still, he convinced himself there was time. If he kept working from the inside, maybe he could find another solution before the public announcement. If Naomi never had to experience the fear, then perhaps the lie would never matter. It was the same mistake he had made after Vanessa left, trying to solve everything alone before anyone else could be hurt. Only this time, the person he was trying to protect was the very person he was hiding the truth from. Outside the office, life with Naomi continued as if nothing had changed. She dragged him to an evening figure drawing class at Lantern House. "I need moral support. I know nothing about drawing." "Exactly. Your confidence level is perfect." Grant studied the model carefully before making his first sketch. When class ended, Naomi looked over his shoulder. "You drew me." "I did." She stared at the page. "You made me look like a chair." Grant frowned. "A chair. A chair with hair. I was focusing on posture." "You accidentally invented furniture." For the first time in days, Grant laughed without forcing it. They spent another afternoon helping Milo build a bridge for the regional science competition. Grant measured every beam twice. Naomi glued 2 pieces backward. Milo sighed dramatically. "I love both of you. But for completely different engineering reasons." Another evening, rain trapped them downtown after grabbing coffee. Naomi searched her bag. No umbrella. Grant wasn't surprised. She pulled out the canvas bag instead. "It'll work." "It absolutely won't." She threw it over both their heads anyway. The bag was far too small. Half their shoulders remained soaked. They laughed the entire walk back to the truck. Grant hadn't laughed in the rain since before Vanessa. As Naomi's final portfolio deadline approached, they spent long nights at her dining table. Grant reviewed presentation layouts. Naomi adjusted illustrations. Milo occasionally wandered through the room to announce completely unnecessary observations. "You two are flirting with remarkable administrative efficiency." Neither of them answered. Near midnight, Naomi finally fell asleep with a pencil still in her hand. Grant quietly removed it before it rolled onto the floor. He folded his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. She smiled in her sleep without waking. For several minutes, Grant simply watched her. Then he looked toward Milo, who was pretending to read while secretly observing everything. Milo spoke without lifting his eyes. "You know she's pretending to be stronger than she is. I know. Just don't disappear." Grant couldn't answer, because the secret sitting inside his briefcase already felt like the first step toward doing exactly that. A week later, after submitting Naomi's portfolio, the three of them stayed behind to lock up Lantern House. The building was quiet. For once, there were no children running through the hallways, no pottery wheels spinning, no paintbrushes clattering into sinks, just silence. Grant handed Naomi the spare key she had asked him to keep while she organized supplies. She smiled. "Congratulations." "For what?" "You officially became someone I trust with keys. I wasn't aware there were levels." "There are." "What comes after keys?" She stepped closer. "I'll let you know." Before Grant could say anything else, Naomi kissed him, softly, carefully, almost shyly. Something pressed awkwardly between them. She pulled back and laughed. The canvas bag, still hanging across her shoulder. "This bag has terrible timing." Grant smiled. "It takes after its owner." She rolled her eyes, moved the bag aside, and kissed him again. This time, nothing interrupted them. When they finally separated, Grant realized something that frightened him more than the redevelopment project. Somewhere between broken railings, burnt lasagna, and emergency cookies, he had started thinking of Naomi and Milo as home. The public announcement arrived sooner than Grant expected. City Hall overflowed with reporters, developers, local residents, and members of community organizations. Naomi stood beside Mrs. Bellamy, Tessa, Milo, and dozens of Lantern House volunteers carrying handmade signs. "Save our community. Homes before high-rises. Art belongs here." Naomi wasn't worried. She believed they still had time to fight. Then Richard Vale stepped onto the stage. "Today," he announced, "we introduce the team that will shape the future of Jackson Ward." Grant walked out beside him. Applause echoed through the room. Naomi felt her stomach drop. Behind Grant, the presentation screen lit up. Lead architect, Grant Ellis Richards smiled proudly. The visionary responsible for bringing this neighborhood into a new era. Grant immediately spotted Naomi in the crowd. Her sign slowly slipped from her hands. The meeting ended in a blur. Grant pushed through the crowd until he reached her. "Naomi, listen to me. I can explain. I've been trying to change the project from the inside." She stared at him, then asked only one question. "When did you know my house was on that map?" Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That silence answered everything. She understood. He had known since the night he found the redevelopment plans on her kitchen table. He had entered her home, helped repair it, read through her guardianship paperwork, helped her imagine a future, kissed her, all while carrying a secret capable of destroying everything she loved. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice remained steady. She reached into her pocket and placed the spare house key in Grant's hand. "You don't get to help me carry the bag." She looked directly at him. "While deciding where I'm allowed to live." Then she walked away. Grant didn't follow. For the second time in his life, he stood watching someone disappear because he had waited too long to tell the truth. That evening, another letter arrived at Naomi's house. Final notice. Because of an older debt left behind by her mother, the bank was accelerating foreclosure proceedings. She now had only 10 days to present a repayment plan before the process moved forward. Naomi stared at Grant's number on her phone for a long time, then she locked the screen. This time, she didn't call him. After City Hall, Naomi disappeared from Grant's life. His calls went unanswered. His texts stayed unread. Twice he drove past her house. Twice he remained in his truck without knocking. He knew apologies meant nothing, while the truth still carried consequences. Meanwhile, Naomi fought every battle she could find. She picked up extra shifts at a neighborhood bookstore. She accepted freelance illustration jobs that paid far less than they were worth. She sold original paintings she'd once promised herself she would never part with. She skipped meals so Milo wouldn't notice how little money remained. She slept only a few hours each night. During the day, she argued with the bank for an extension. At night, she searched for grants, scholarships, and miracle solutions that never seemed to exist. Whenever Milo asked if everything was okay, she smiled too quickly. "We're fine." He wanted to believe her. He stopped asking. The exhaustion eventually caught up with her. She arrived late to her final portfolio review. Her presentation was rushed. Several required pieces were unfinished. One professor looked at her gently before speaking. "Naomi, this doesn't reflect your ability." "It reflects my week," she answered with a tired smile. The committee postponed approving her portfolio. Her scholarship office sent a warning. Continued academic decline could place her financial aid under review. Outside the building, Tessa found Naomi sitting alone on the steps with her sketchbook closed on her lap. "You look terrible. I've looked worse." "You've looked happier." Naomi forced another smile. "I'm fine." Tessa folded her arms. "You say that like it's a threat." For the first time, Naomi couldn't think of a joke. Across town, Grant buried himself in project files. If Richard truly intended to demolish Lantern House, Grant wanted every document. Every inspection, every engineering report, every structural assessment. Late one evening, something didn't make sense. One report described severe roof deterioration. A second inspection, completed only 3 weeks earlier, mentioned only moderate water damage. The photographs attached to the demolition request showed only the worst sections of the building. Entire pages discussing repair options were missing. Grant requested archived engineering records. The originals told a different story. Lantern House needed restoration, not demolition. Someone had exaggerated the damage. Someone had quietly removed the less expensive repair recommendations before presenting the proposal to the city. Grant stared at the paperwork. This wasn't redevelopment, it was manipulation. 3 nights later, another storm rolled across Richmond. Naomi and Milo returned to Lantern House after closing hours. Heavy rain had begun leaking through part of the roof. They hurried inside to move children's paintings, pottery projects, and community records away from the growing puddles. "This one next," Naomi called, lifting a box of artwork. Milo disappeared into the storage room to retrieve another stack. Then a deafening crack echoed through the building. Part of the weakened ceiling collapsed into the storage area. Dust filled the hallway. A support beam twisted just enough to warp the storage room door shut. "Naomi, I'm here," she shouted back. She threw herself against the door. It wouldn't move. "Milo, are you hurt?" "I'm okay, I'm just stuck." Naomi grabbed broken boards with her bare hands, trying desperately to free the doorway. Splinters tore across her palms. The door remained jammed. Tessa, who had arrived moments earlier to help move supplies, pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Grant." Naomi looked up. "No. He's the only architect I know who understands this building." Before Naomi could protest again, Tessa had already made the call. Grant arrived less than 15 minutes later. One look at the damaged hallway told him forcing the door open could collapse more of the ceiling. "Don't touch anything," he said calmly. He studied the original floor plans he had photographed weeks earlier during his inspection. There should be an access passage behind the pottery room. He ran through the adjacent classroom, climbed over a fallen beam, and located a narrow maintenance entrance hidden behind old shelving. Minutes later, he reached the storage room from the opposite side. "You still okay, Milo? I've had better Tuesdays." Grant smiled despite everything. "Come on." He guided Milo safely back through the maintenance corridor. Apart from a few bruises and a great story for Science Club, Milo was unharmed. The moment Naomi saw her brother, she wrapped him in the tightest hug she'd ever given him. Only after she knew he was safe did she finally look around. The roof, the broken walls, the soaked paintings, years of memories covered in plaster dust. Something inside her quietly gave way. She sank onto the hallway floor. "I promised my mother I would keep Milo safe." Her voice cracked. "I promised I would keep this place alive." She buried her face in her hands. "I keep promising things I can't do." Grant sat beside her. He didn't tell her everything would be okay, because he wasn't sure it would. Instead, he said quietly, "You don't have to be fine tonight." For the first time since they'd met, Naomi cried, not because she had failed, because she was finally too tired to pretend she hadn't. The following morning, Grant walked into Richard Vale's office, carrying every original engineering report. "I know what was removed." Richard barely looked surprised. "You went digging. You falsified the recommendation. I presented the version that served the project. You manipulated public safety. I made a business decision." Grant placed the files on Richard's desk. "I'm giving these to the city." Richard stood. "If you do that, you'll lose this job." Grant said nothing. "You'll never become partner." Silence. No major commercial firm will touch you. Still silence. You may even end up in court. Finally, Grant answered. You're throwing away my future. Richard shook his head. No. Grant met his eyes. I'm refusing to build my future on someone else's loss. Within days, the city suspended the redevelopment project, pending an independent investigation. News spread quickly. So did the consequences. Grant Ellis was terminated from Vale Urban Development, effective immediately. His office key stopped working before sunset. The investigation might save Lantern House, but it couldn't erase Naomi's mortgage debt. That evening, Naomi quietly packed one of Milo's suitcases. Ohio, her aunt's house. She filled out withdrawal papers from the university. If Milo was safe, she could work full-time and try to save the house. Grant pulled into the driveway just as the porch light flickered on. He hadn't come with another apology. He had come with an idea. Then he saw the suitcase beside the front door, and suddenly realized he might already be too late. Grant stood on Naomi's porch, staring at Milo's suitcase. Naomi opened the door but didn't invite him inside. If you're here to offer me money, she said quietly. Don't. I'm not. She waited. I know that's not what you need. For the first time since City Hall, Grant wasn't carrying apologies. He was carrying a folder. I can't erase the debt, he said. I can't undo what I hid, but I can show you another way through it. Naomi reluctantly let him in. One by one, Grant spread the papers across the kitchen table. The city has agreed to review Lantern House for community heritage status, while the investigation is ongoing. He slid another document toward her. The families who use Lantern House are willing to form a non-profit organization. If that happens, they'll qualify for preservation grants. Another page. I spoke with your department chair. Naomi frowned. You what? I didn't ask for special treatment. I asked whether your restoration work at Lantern House could become your senior project. She looked down. The proposal carried her professor's signature. It was approved, Grant continued. A local children's publisher saw your portfolio during the university review. They're looking for a part-time illustrator. Naomi blinked. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to. He smiled faintly. They wanted to contact you after finals. He placed the final document on the table. The bank is willing to postpone foreclosure if you can show stable income and a realistic repayment plan. Naomi looked at him. So, what's your part in all of this? Grant hesitated. I'll volunteer as the architect. No salary, no ownership. I'll design the restoration for the lowest possible cost. I'm not here to save everything. I'm just trying to make sure you have a chance to save it. Silence settled over the room. For the first time in weeks, Naomi saw what Grant was really offering. Not rescue, opportunity. The decision was still hers. 2 days later, Lantern House filled with more people than Naomi had ever seen. Parents baked pies. Artists donated paintings. Children sold handmade greeting cards. Mrs. Bellamy somehow convinced half the neighborhood to attend a fundraising fair. We're not letting this place disappear, she declared. Naomi stood in the middle of the crowded room, completely overwhelmed. I didn't ask anyone to do this. Mrs. Bellamy smiled. You didn't have to. Naomi turned toward Tessa. You all made these plans without telling me. Milo shrugged. You help people without asking every day. Maybe this is karma. Tessa grinned. Annoying, supportive karma. Naomi laughed through unexpected tears. For years she had believed accepting help meant admitting failure. Now she looked around the room. No one pitied her. They simply loved the place she had spent years protecting. Maybe strength wasn't carrying everything alone. Maybe it was trusting other people to carry a corner when the weight became too much. That evening, after the fundraiser ended, Grant found Naomi sitting alone on the Lantern House porch. The broken section of roof had already been covered with temporary supports. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Finally, Grant broke the silence. I thought if I fixed the problem before you saw it, I wouldn't have to risk losing you. Naomi listened quietly. That wasn't protection. It was fear. He looked down at his hands. Vanessa decided the future of our relationship without telling me. I spent 2 years promising myself I'd never do that to someone else. A bitter smile crossed his face. And somehow, I did exactly the same thing to you. Naomi drew a slow breath. I kept hiding things too. Grant looked up. I told everyone I was fine because I thought if people saw how much I was struggling, they'd decide I wasn't worth staying for. Grant nodded. I understand that. He smiled gently. You asked me to hold your bag for 2 minutes. She laughed softly. Then you spent weeks proving you'd rather carry everything alone. Naomi looked at him. Are you offering to carry it again? Grant shook his head. No. He reached for her hand. I'm offering to walk beside you. Naomi closed the remaining distance herself. Their kiss was slow, unhurried. There were no ringing phones, just two people finally choosing honesty over fear. About 15 seconds later, a voice echoed from the hallway. I waited a respectful 14 seconds. They looked up. Milo leaned against the doorway with remarkable disappointment. I feel that demonstrates extraordinary emotional maturity for a 12-year-old. Grant laughed. Naomi buried her face against his shoulder. For the first time in a long while, neither of them felt like running anymore. 6 weeks after the storm, life was still imperfect. Naomi hadn't paid off the mortgage. Grant's new architecture studio occupied a single rented office above an old bookstore. Lantern House remained surrounded by scaffolding. Neither of them had talked about marriage. Their relationship was still new enough that ordinary mornings felt exciting, but important things had changed. Milo remained with Naomi. Her scholarship had been restored after her Lantern House restoration project received the department's highest evaluation. Grant's small studio had already accepted its second community restoration project. Lantern House officially received protected community heritage status. Mrs. Bellamy restarted her pottery class in a temporary room across the street, and Naomi had been invited to meet a children's publisher in New York. Her graduation exhibition filled the university gallery. Families wandered between paintings. Children pointed excitedly at colorful illustrations inspired by Lantern House. The largest piece stood alone in the center. Its title read, The Man Who Held the Bag. The painting showed Grant standing in the train station, with Naomi's worn canvas bag hanging from one hand. But unlike real life, the woman in the painting wasn't running away, she was turning back. Grant studied it for a long time. You made me look taller, Naomi smiled. Art requires imagination. He pointed toward the painting. You also removed the coffee stain from my shirt. That was artistic mercy. I appreciate your generosity. A few days later, they returned to Main Street Station. Just ordinary travelers beginning ordinary journeys. Naomi handed Grant the familiar canvas bag. Can you hold my bag for just 2 minutes? Grant narrowed his eyes immediately. That sentence has historically caused problems. She laughed and opened the bag. Instead of paperwork, she pulled out 2 train tickets. New York. One for her, one for him. The publisher wants to meet me. Grant smiled. That's incredible. Naomi looked at him carefully. I'm not asking you to rescue me. I'm asking if you want to come. Grant studied the ticket for a moment. How long is the trip? Naomi smiled. Longer than 2 minutes. Grant slipped the canvas bag over his shoulder. Good. I'm getting used to carrying it. Naomi gently corrected him. Sharing it. He met her eyes. Sharing it. Together they stepped onto the train. Only 2 people who had spent years fearing they would be left behind, finally choosing the same destination. As the train pulled away from the platform, Naomi rested her head against Grant's shoulder. The canvas bag sat quietly between them. Grant placed one hand on its worn strap. Naomi covered his hand with hers. Neither of them had to carry it alone anymore. She had asked him to hold her bag for 2 minutes. Neither of them knew she was really asking whether he could stay a little longer. Sometimes, the strongest people aren't the ones who carry everything alone. They're the ones who finally allow someone to walk beside them. Naomi believed love meant protecting everyone, even if it meant breaking herself in the process. Grant believed love meant fixing every problem before anyone else could see it. In the end, they discovered that love isn't about carrying another person's burdens. It's about sharing the weight, honestly, imperfectly, and together. One small act of kindness can quietly become the beginning of an entirely different life. If this story touched your heart, what do you think was the moment Grant truly fell in love with Naomi? Was it the emergency cookie, the almost kiss, or the moment she finally allowed herself to cry? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories and join us for another unforgettable journey in our next story. Also share your thoughts in the comments. We'd genuinely love to read them.